Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. And yeah, it's Sunday evening. It's 7:35 p.m. here in Poland. Hope you all are having a wonderful day. It is the Passion Sunday and the blessed feast day of Saint Patrick. So for those who celebrate Saint Patrick, and yeah, I hope it's been a good day. And Horse, of course, welcome. Good to see you, Dr. Obvious. Always good to see you. Matthew Velasquez, Artsy Fartsy, Nerdy Wordy. Uh, with the best name on the internet, Dr. Jonathan Gemmell from New Zealand. Welcome. Monday AM, good grief. Philip from Spain. Damian Kuzmich, XYZ, great to have you. Thank you for the support. Thunderous, Sandro, and others. Yeah, so welcome, guys. Many people leave comments saying that they really dislike the fact that I engage with the comments, with the chat, that I engage with the audience during my talks. They wish I would just read the news as if I were a newscaster. Well, that's not how the channel works. If it's something that someone is offended by or upset by, um, yeah, there are other channels, I guess, that discuss these topics, or maybe they aren't, but this is how it's done here. Yeah, guys, so I was away for 1 week. I was in South Africa. I got back. It's a full day's travel to get there. It's a full day's travel back. It's 2 flights, long haul. And yeah, so I am a little worn out, but it's good to be back online. And yeah, I had to go and sort out a number of issues. I still have my mom's estate to deal with. There were some legal issues that cropped up, and yep. So it wasn't all fun. It's just really visiting family. My granny is 96 years old. Actually, I should post a picture of her when and there's one on my phone, but to get it, it's going to be, yeah. So my 96-year-old granny, I had to visit her. Not sure how long she'll be with us, and yeah, so it wasn't really a fun time. I got to see none of my friends. I just saw family, did some necessary things, and I'm back. It's 7:30 p.m. Horse. So Michael Glovatsky, hello. It works out to attend this live today. Thank you. Good to see you. Yeah, so at the moment, I'm going to be doing discussions on Gnosticism and early Christianity, as well as the early biblical canon. So I'll be talking about Gnosticism, which technically would be the Catholic Church versus the Gnostics, although I have that as a separate talk, the Catholic Church versus Gnosticism. That would be a separate discussion on heresies. This is really the early church, which really is the Catholic Church, despite any protestations to the contrary, I would say. And of course, we're using as a basis, we're discussing the common view of Gnosticism, which comes from Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. So we want to compare the actual Gnostic writings with the Da Vinci Code. And of course, I had someone leave a comment saying, well, you're just lying. You're just making things up. You're not using the actual Gnostic writings. I'm like, that's really stupid, because I'm using Dr. Michael Heiser's work, who's quoting the Gnostic writings, and I have quoted them in the past. Welcome, Century Sense. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's catch up on a few things. So it is Passion Sunday, also known as the fifth Sunday of Lent. It's the Christian observance that marks the beginning of Holy Week. That's the week leading up to Easter. It commemorates Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem and the beginning of his journey towards crucifixion and the resurrection. It's a time for reflection on Jesus' sacrifice and teachings, as well as a time for believers to prepare themselves spiritually for the celebration of Easter. I looked that up because I wasn't actually sure what Passion Sunday really meant. So thank you very much, Geckoberry. Also, by the way, Thaddeus reached out to me this morning, actually. Muslims managed to shut down my stream today with false flags, which is serious. So obviously he must have been over the target. And yeah, this is very unfortunate that Muslims will do this. He says, to respond, I was thinking I'll read some of the scholars of Islam talking about dhimmis. So he asked me, do you happen to have a ready-made collection of quotes on the subject? I sent him an extensive library, so he hasn't read my message yet, I noticed. But I did respond as soon as I woke up, because I was still fast asleep at that time. But I have sent him an extensive response. So he's got dozens and dozens of responses. So hopefully he can use those. But yeah, this is something that's pretty serious. Because someone actually asked me, do I still talk to Thaddeus? Well, Thaddeus wrote to me this morning. Okay, so by the way, so for these subscribers, I have sent you a link to the first 30 slides of my Martinus Luther, the first Protestant slides. So I've sent you a link to that, the first 30 slides. I sent you that today, so you guys are free to download that. And for for just viewers and subscribers, not the channel members, you can get the first 15 slides. I have the link pinned in the chat, so you can have the links on top in the chat. But also you can go to my community tab and you'll find Luther the First Protestant, and you can get the link to the first 15 slides if you guys want to download that. That's available to you. And it's a zip file, just unzip it. And then also, by the way, tomorrow I will do Martin Luther's 95 Theses. That is a discussion on Martin Luther and scatology. Scatology is poop. So Martin Luther seemed to have a fascination with the brown stuff Martin Luther had a fascination with poop and farts. And as I write here, so we need to talk about Martin Luther's 95 Theses. That's going to be tomorrow evening, probably 2 parts. So Martin Luther, as I write here, was foul-mouthed in the extreme. He was truly crass. In other words, the first Christian, right? The first Christian, using poop and fart references to silence critics during his coarseness, silence critics due to his coarseness and presumably a lack of proper arguments. The founder of the Protestant religion and primary innovator of its theology had a fascination with, excuse my French here, with shit. Insulting people by claiming they were satanic shit, he argued with Satan loudly while on the toilet, and developed major theological doctrines like sola fide while taking a dump. As we can all probably admit, we all have our best theological ideas while taking a shit. No doubt, because this is when God blesses us with theological innovation. So, yeah, I think having major theological ideas while taking a dump is normal. And that's just, that's how your best ideas in theology come to you. So crass is an adjective that means lacking sensitivity, refinement, or intelligence, coarse or vulgar. It can also refer to behavior or language that is blatantly offensive, abusive, or unrefined. So I don't know if this is going to be called... anyway, so also there's a paper that you need to download. That's what's my major source, my major reference. German Hercules, the impact of scatology on the definition of Martin Luther as a man. So this will be something that I will refer to heavily. And this will also link to and relate to additional discussions that I will be having in my Luther series. So I'll be doing stuff within the slideshow, but I'll also be going to third-party sources that I'll be pulling in. This is all relevant to the discussion on Luther. So Luther had a serious fascination with poop. And Luther was an incredibly crude, incredibly coarse, vulgar man. It's really, I mean, the more you read about this man, the more you realize the nicest thing you can say about Martin Luther is that he was an asshole. That is honestly the least offensive, nice thing you can say about this man. Yes, Lloyd, said the 95 Theses, because that's exactly what I have here. Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, because this man had a thing for feces. And we'll be discussing this on and off, but most of what I'll be dealing with is just what is here, although as I go through the Martin Luther series, I'll bring in other details and ideas. But this is largely a discussion around this paper. Okay, guys, so that's out of the way. So now we need to get back to Gnosticism. So, thank you, Natalie Stagg. Thank you very much. So, yeah, how's Luther ever been to complete seminary? Was he a diversity recruit? I have no idea. Definitely, yeah, probably a diversity hire. Okay, guys, so yeah, 95, yeah, grief. Okay, so I just want to go back to the last couple of slides that I touched on in the previous Gnosticism talk, just to refresh everyone. So the weight of the evidence falls on the side of those who see Gnosticism as a thoroughly Christian movement, shall we say a Christian heresy, right? With some scholars arguing that Gnostic theology is based on interpretations of the early Christian writings attributed to Apostles Paul and John, suggesting that Gnosticism could not have originated earlier than 90 to 95 AD. Now, the Gnostic writings are 3rd and 4th century, let's say 4th century writings, right? Let me skip forward. Now, I'll cover this slide. I've already done this one, but I'll pick up from here where I left off and continue to the next part of the slides. So once again, thanks all for joining me, and good to be back, and good to have all of you here. So let's continue. Goeienaand uit Duitsland uit. Julle mooi mense. Baie dankie Rick Baas. Goed om jou te sien. Right. Okay, where did Gnostics emerge from? So Gnostics emerged from Egypt and attempted to merge their knowledge of the Old Testament. Don't forget, that's the Christian term. It's just called the Jewish Bible for the Jews, and the Jewish writings. This is before the New Testament is written. So that's Egypt, okay? And of course, we must not forget that Hermes Trismegistus, right, with his Hermeticism also, that is sourced in Egypt, and the two are linked at the hip. As the New Testament began to be written, they sought parallels in local Egyptian religion, resulting in the development of Gnosticism. So, linked to the Hermetic corpus. Evidence shows an intellectual, eclectic Gnostic community rising out of the ruins of the Jewish court in Alexandria after AD 117, losing the intellectual war in Alexandria by the early 3rd century, and going on the run south, away from the ecclesiastical authorities in Alexandria. So they went towards Western Turkey, Asia Minor. With the emergence of Christianity, many Gnostic schools in Egypt became Christian or incorporated Christian elements into Gnostic doctrine. So you've got this merger of Christianity with Gnosticism. I need to do a talk, and I've mentioned to you before that I have listened to Gnostic preachers talk, and there's the Gnostic Catholic Church, there's other Gnostic churches, and when you hear them discuss, when you hear them preach, it can take a while before you realize that this is not Christianity, because it is so much like Christianity until you click and you realize when they say something that's not orthodox, but you can be fooled easily. It's really, really tough sometimes. Another issue that arises is the question of evil and its existence. Orthodoxy maintains that if anything other than God is in control of evil, it implies dualism and diminishes God's power. Right, so we've discussed this. So the Jewish Bible does not portray a competitor to God. Therefore, Orthodoxy rejects the idea of another force equal in power to God. Some Gnostics, as well as some heretics, as we've discussed within modernism, believe that God contains both good and evil. God does good and evil, or God controls Satan and makes Satan do evil. Satan is not an independent actor. He's under the control of God, who tells him what evil to do. So there are these, and these would be heretical views. The Orthodox position suggests that while God is somehow in control of evil, there may be different interpretations of how this control is exercised. The New Testament has the idea that God can take evil, manipulate it, and ultimately use it for good, in the sense that if your house burns down, God didn't necessarily cause your house to burn down, because that would be God doing evil. God is not supposed to do evil. But from that, God will try to find a path towards good. He will try to find a way to recover from that. He will try to use it for good, but doesn't mean he causes it to do good. Right. So, is Gnosticism an attempt to answer the problem of evil? And this is where we ended. Gnostics believe that evil was inherent in the world's creation. It is a view that the world is evil, that matter is evil. Only spirit, only faith, if you want to think, pardon me, sola fide is good. Only spirit is good. Everything else is evil, because you saw the depravity of man as discussed by people like John Calvin and Martin Luther, that everything you do, every single thing that you do is evil. You can only do evil, you can only want evil, because you are steeped in evil. There is nothing good that man can do. That's the view of Martin Luther and John Calvin, which actually goes against the biblical view. So, evil is inherent in the world's creation, and it was not the result of a fall or wrongdoing. So if the world is created evil, then the responsible entity, Yahweh, in the Jewish Bible must also be evil. Gnostics identified a separation between the true God, who is pure and light, and the creator God associated with the world's existence, the God who made the world, who said that the world was made and it was good. Gnostics were genuinely troubled by the problem of evil and raised valid questions about its origin, in one sense a response to existential and theological inquiries. While the exegesis may have been flawed, the questions they asked were important. These are valid questions, but their conclusions are, well, anti-Christian. However, the idea that Gnosticism was once the dominant view, as portrayed by Dan Brown and some sources like Elaine Pagels, Bart Ehrman, lacks evidence and is not historically accurate. Gnosticism was always on the fringes. It was on the outskirts. It was a reaction against the majority opinion within the early Christian church. The idea that orthodoxy prevailed because of the powerful influence of figures like Irenaeus is misleading and inaccurate. These ideas were utterly contrary. I already discussed the Gnostic mythology or cosmology, which is clearly unchristian, clearly goes against anything within Christian doctrine. Early Christians, including the church fathers, were facing persecution and were trying to survive in a hostile environment. They had other concerns going on. The historical record contradicts the portrayal that Gnostics were suppressed by the power-hungry church authorities. They had fringe ideas that didn't really resonate with people. They were trying desperately to gain influence. Now, finally, at certain points, they did. But Gnosticism has always been the enemy of the church. Eating in a pizzeria, Matthew. Yeah, sorry about your friends, Dr. Obvious. I hope that they managed to solve that and deal with that. That's really unfortunate. Yes, it does. Chevalier says, wouldn't that contradict one? God saw all that he had made, and it was good, and there was evening and there was morning. Yeah, exactly. That does contradict the creation, the Genesis 1 narrative, that everything that God made was very good, whereas they have exactly the opposite view. Right, Gnostics are heretics with false beliefs, so it is important to approach the historical context with accuracy and avoid misconceptions about the motivations and dynamics of early Christian groups. Now, Gnostics raised what can be deemed valid questions, but refused to accept the instructions and arguments put forth by the early Christian church councils. So too, we can make that same accusation against Martin Luther and John Calvin, and I will be showing you why. Note, rhetorical questions that people put forth are often not legitimate. They are sophistry designed to sow doubt. So very often questions that are posed are not legitimate, like when Muslims ask you questions about Christianity. These are not legitimate questions. They're not even going to respect your answer. These are simply questions designed to sow doubt. It's like, what about, what about, what about? Those kinds of questions are simply designed to undermine, not designed to elucidate or elicit truth. Now, the Gnostic inability to coherently refute the majority arguments led to their defeat at the Council of Nicaea. The council did not eliminate Gnosticism, but it did make a declaration regarding the falsity of Arius' position. Yes, atheists do love those too. Right? So the council made a declaration regarding the falsity of Arius' position on the nature of Jesus. So some individuals at the council did not want Arius expelled. Some considered him still Christian. Why? I don't know. Arians are referred to as Christians in some ancient writings. So a handful, just a small handful of fathers didn't want him expelled. They still considered him Christian, even though his views were heretical. Now why? So they say that Arius accepted that Christ is the way of salvation, being too lenient. In other words, well, he just believed in Jesus, so that's enough. Well, okay, fine, that's a pretty low bar, it's a pretty low standard. Even Muslims believe in Jesus, I guess that makes them all good Christians, right? No, it doesn't. Why do I caption my image too few Lloyds today? I've been using too few Lloyds for a while. Too few Lloyds. Well, we could use a few more Lloyds, I think. But since you asked, because it was a response to someone who claimed that there were too many Marys. So yeah, because there are too many Marys. We can do with fewer of them. You'll know what I'm talking about if you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, let's just say that she made some very bad takes on things that I discussed about Luther, and she made some very bad takes on early church history, and she made some very bad takes on the Bible, which was just laughable. So anyway, yeah. So in response to that, I changed my name to Too Few Lloyds, because we have too many Marys. We can do with at least one fewer. However, Arius' view of Jesus as the way of salvation was heretical. The early Christian church saw Arius as a heretic. Arius believed that Jesus was a created being and subordinate to God the Father, which is the Muslim view, right? So Arius accepted that Jesus Christ is the way of salvation. Except Jesus is a created being, only God can forgive sins. So if Jesus is created, then he cannot be God and he cannot forgive sins, therefore he has no authority over sin, no authority over death. So you understand, this undermines Christian theology. So Arius cannot be Christian. He's a heretic. So therefore, saying that, well, he accepted Christ, well, which version of Christ? What heretical version of Christ did he accept? So therefore, that's a very weak argument. That is not permissible as an actual argument to justify him being Christian. I know it's not on topic, so I'll ask if you have free time to make short-form content. Could you address Zoroastrianism? For what I know, it sounds like the earliest form of Christianity. It's the earliest form of Christianity. Sure it is. Sure, whatever you say. So I have discussed Zoroastrianism in my monotheism series, and Zoroastrianism, actually, a lot of it blends into Islam. So yeah, but as you know, Christianity was founded by the pharaohs. Christianity was founded by I don't know, you pick your favorite conspiracy theory, right? So everybody has a theory on. So I mean, just as you know, Islam was created by the Jews. Islam was also created by the Catholic Church. I wish those two groups would get together and decide which one of them is right and which one of them is wrong, because they can't both be right. So yeah. Anyway, so you should look at the link between Islam and Zoroastrianism. Mal at Islamic Origins has done a lot of work on Zoroastrianism. So have a look at that. Anyway, so Arius said Jesus was created, a created being. He was not part of the Trinity, not God. He was subordinate to God the Father, which is a heretical view, which is a Gnostic view, which is the Muslim view. Right, so this is heresy, in that it contradicted the Orthodox view, which held that Jesus is fully divine and co-eternal with the Father. So the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD condemned Arius' teachings as heretical and issued the Nicene Creed, which affirmed the Orthodox view of Jesus as begotten, not made, of one essence or one being with the Father. Right. Right. So, while Arius and his followers may have considered themselves Christians, their beliefs about the nature of Jesus were heretical by the standards of the early Christian church then and today. And of course, we know that many of the theologians in the 19th century, Lutheran theologians, considered that Martin Luther was continuing the tradition of Arius. I've discussed that on the show already. I've discussed that in detail already. The discussions that he was the continuation of Arius. Now, Nag or Naj, so you're looking at the Egyptian or the Arabic pronunciation, means curve or bend. So Gnostic ideas re-emerged during the Middle Ages and were embraced by certain groups in both early and late Middle Ages, as did, of course, the emergence of Hermetical views, right? The Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes Trismegistus, his views also emerged in the Middle Ages. So despite not being widely supported, some individuals found the Gnostic position appealing and considered it a satisfactory answer to religious questions. These could not have been smart people. Right, there are 7th century writings that see what becomes Islam is an anti-Trinitarian heresy, exactly. And a lot of Aryans fled to Persian Empire, got into contact with the Arabs, yes. In Sanskrit, Muhammad means great poison. Nag means snake, who can also spit out. That is very interesting, Terry. Thank you for that. Hold on. Let me just bring that up here. That's very, very interesting. Just do that. So apparently, okay, I'd have to source this. I have to go and check this, obviously. But Terry says in Sanskrit, Muhammad means great poison. Nag means snake who spits out poison or venom. Coincidence? That was my first reaction to the term Nag Hammadi. So Nag, we'll get to that, but Hammadi means it's the diminutive of Muhammad, right? Muhammad. So Nag Hammadi is related to that, but we'll get to that. But thank you for that. That's very, very interesting. I need to bear that in mind. All right. So the proponents of Gnosticism never presented evidence or arguments refuting the majority viewpoint, as their preference for the Gnostic sufficed. So Gnosticism is really just a preference. It's not an evidence-based view. For instance, when you go look at archaeologists who do archaeological digs, they rely on the Old Testament and the New Testament for where to dig, for what they found, to try and verify what they found. They look at the history in the Old and New Testaments, because these are historical documents. They have historical validity. Whereas the Gnostic texts have utterly zero. And this will annoy Gnostics when you speak with them and ask them, show me the historical evidence that gives proof of the Gnostic claims. Show me how this actually merges with history. What evidence is there? Can you show a dig that brought up Gnostic idea? There is nothing. There is literally zero. So understand, Christianity is a historically based religion. It is based on literal history. It is true. It's factual. It happened. That is the definition of truth. Whereas Gnosticism is myth. It is 100% myth. It has zero grounding in reality, in history. Nothing. There is zero in Gnosticism. where you can say that, well, no, historians and archaeologists have used this, because they've led them to archaeological findings. No, sure, Nag Hammadi might have been real as an archaeological site, but the Gnostic writings are purely myth. So Maha means great, Mad means poison, so you get Muhammad. Interesting. All right, so we find influence and threads of Gnostic ideas stretching back to the pre-Christian times, particularly in Jewish texts from the first millennium BC. I would have to do a different episode again, and I've mentioned we would have to go to the discussion on what was the name of that? The Book of Al-Chasai. I've discussed that. Okay, so though the Dead Sea Scrolls do not have explicit Gnostic beliefs, Gnostics were drawn to certain ideas and passages within them. So these various strands of Gnostic influence converged in the 2nd or 3rd century, marking the emergence of Gnosticism as a recognizable movement. Now, let us look at the manuscripts of the New Testament, not just the Gospels, versus the Gnostic Gospels from Nag Hammadi. Now, in the context of the name Nag Hammadi, Naj in Egyptian Arabic translates to distinguished in English. So the term distinguished signifies being recognized for excellence or eminence, suggesting that the area has a notable or special status. In this context, Nag Hammadi is recognized as unique or prominent place for some specific reason, such as historical, cultural, or religious significance. Thank you, Matthew Velasquez. Much appreciated. Right? So, distinguished, Muhammad. But that mention that you've made there of the Hindu or the Sanskrit of Muhammad, that's very, very interesting. Okay. So, reaction to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, in the early days of Qumran research, the early days of Qumran research produced spectacular theories about Jesus and the first Christians and the Qumran community. So this French scholar, André Dupont-Sommer, argued that the teacher of righteousness, the founder and the first leader of the group in Qumran, according to the scrolls, had a career that prefigured and paralleled that of Jesus. He writes, the Galilean master, as he is presented to us in the writings of the New Testament. So this is just after the finding of the Nag Hammadi scrolls. And of course, these people, the Qumran scrolls. So now they have all these fantastical theories, and it took a while for everything to settle down, but everybody was very keen to jump on the idea that they could now debunk the New Testament utilizing these new documents. The Galilean master, as he is presented to us in the writings of the New Testament, appears in many respects as an astonishing reincarnation of the master of justice, that is, the teacher of righteousness, as the title came to be translated. Like the latter, he preached penitence, poverty, humility, love of neighbor, chastity. Like him, he prescribed the observance of the law of Moses, the whole law, but the law finished and perfected thanks to his own revelations. Like him, he was elect and Messiah of God, the Messiah, Redeemer of the world. Like him, he was the object of the hostility of the priests, the party of the Sadducees. Like him, he was condemned and put to death. Like him, he pronounced judgment on Jerusalem, which was taken and destroyed by the Romans for having put him to death. Like him, at the end time, he will be the supreme judge. Like him, he founded a church whose adherents fervently awaited his glorious return. But of course, as you know, Christianity is based on Zoroastrianism. As you know, Christianity is based on the Qumran scrolls and the Galilean master. As you know, Christianity is based on sun worship. As you know, it's based on what they call the Hellenic Greek ideas. As you know, Christianity is based on Ra. I don't know, there's already 5 different completely contradictory ideas here. So if someone can tell me which one is right, because we can think of dozens. If we go have a look, we could find dozens of these. Christianity is based on, pick your particular favorite myth. Like, seriously. Like, which one's right? Right, continue. So he influenced a man called Edmund Wilson, who wrote the Scrolls from the Dead Sea. Edmund Wilson was the picture on the bottom. He argued that the relation of the Covenanters of Qumran to Jesus and the first Christians could be seen as the successive phases of a movement, saying that the monastery, this structure of stone that endures between the bitter waters and precipitous cliffs, with its oven and its inkwells, its mill and its cesspool, its constellation of sacred fonts and the unadorned graves of its dead, is perhaps more than Bethlehem or Nazareth, the cradle of Christianity. I guess he doesn't know that Iran is the cradle of Christianity. He doesn't know that Greece is the cradle of Christianity. He doesn't know that the sun worship of Rome is the cradle of Christianity. He doesn't know that Islam is the cradle of Christianity, that Jesus was a Muslim. Good grief. Jesus was apparently like 50 different groups. So if someone could figure out which one is correct, because there's just far too many to pick from. Yeah, so anyway, here we've got another one. This is number 91, or 2373 version of where Christianity comes from. So, yeah, so there's lots of different scholarly opinion and also unscholarly opinions. 31 flavors like ice creams, exactly. So, it would seem an immense advantage for cultural and social intercourse, that is, for civilization, that the rise of Christianity should at last be generally understood as simply an episode of human history rather than propagated as dogma and divine revelation. In other words, let's get rid of Christianity. The study of the Dead Sea Scrolls, with the direction it is now taking, cannot fail, one would think, to conduce this. This woman, Kim Iverson, said Jesus was a Christian. Kim Iverson, I've listened to her discuss Christianity, and I'm like, what is she talking about? Yeah, look, I mean, she's... Yeah, she really shouldn't discuss the topic. I don't think she knows what she's talking about. So, Millard Burroughs of Yale embraced the minimalist thesis and he's widely used the Dead Sea Scrolls. He wrote, "There is no danger, however, that our understanding of the New Testament will be revolutionized by the Dead Sea Scrolls as to require a revision of any basic article of Christian faith. All scholars who have worked on the text will agree that this has not happened and will not happen, and it has not happened up to now. Direct influence of the Qumran sect on the early church may turn out to be less probable than parallel developments in the same generational situation. The question here is the same one encountered when we attempt to explain similarities between Judaism and Zoroastrianism, or between Christianity and the pagan mystery cults. After studying the Dead Sea Scrolls for 7 years, I do not find my understanding of the New Testament substantially affected. Its Jewish background is clearer and better understood, but its meaning has neither been changed nor significantly clarified. In other words, the Bible itself is already very, very clear. So this adds some additional clarity, but it gives us some more historical, shall we say, context. But it doesn't change the biblical story in any way. So, now the Dead Sea Scrolls include portions of all the books of Hebrew Bible except Esther. When I discuss Martin Luther, we'll be discussing the relevance and the importance of this as well. In the Scrolls in the New Testament, Krista Stendhal of Harvard collected 13 detailed studies of the sect by 11 different scholars. One man wrote 3 of them, examining the major similarities between the Qumran sect and early Christianity. None of DuPont Summers' writings was selected because they obviously realized he was talking nonsense. Yeah. So, Stendhal concluded, "It is true to say that the scrolls add to the background of Christianity, but they add so much that to arrive at a point where the significance of similarities definitely rescues Christianity from false claims of originality in the popular sense and leads us back to a new grasp of its true foundation in the person and the events of its Messiah." Interesting. Stendhal argued that the similarities between the Qumran sect and early Christianity do not diminish the originality of Christianity, but highlight its true foundation in the person and events of Jesus Christ. The scrolls add depth to the background of Christianity, reinforcing its authenticity rather than detracting from it. While there are major differences between the Qumran and the early Christian literature and communities, there are also significant similarities in theological vocabulary, doctrinal tenets, and ritual practices. It is likely that both traditions are rooted in a common tradition in Judaism. That's the overlap. Because Christianity, as much as don't forget, the New Testament, the Bible was edited by the Protestants to remove the Jewish link. They didn't like the Jews, although they would use that when they needed to, so they were a little inconsistent, but we'll discuss that in the Luther talk. But they wanted to make a separation between the Jews and Jesus. And many quote-unquote Christians, like one that comments regularly on Thaddeus' channel, likes to claim that Christianity is, Jesus was not a Jew. What he was, God alone knows, but Jesus was not a Jew according to this Christian. Right? But it shows here there's a common tradition in Judaism. As more scrolls have been published, this conclusion is further supported. So that was Stendhal, right? Krista Stendhal of Harvard. So let's have a look at now. That's part 1 completed. Let's look at part 2, the New Testament. Right, that's the Da Vinci Code. This is Nag Hammadi. This is here. This is the Sinai. This is Israel up here on the top right. That's the Gaza Strip here. All right, that's Nag Hammadi down here. Right, that's the Red Sea. In the Da Vinci Code, Lee Teabing is cast in story as an expert on the Holy Grail, which we find out is not a chalice or a cup, right? It is the bloodline of Jesus. The Holy Grail, if you've watched good grief, man, what was the movie with, good grief, that's something like, I'm tired. So my memory is suddenly shot. But if you've watched the movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, then you'll know about the Holy Grail was the cup. That, so anyway, so the Holy Grail is the bloodline of, not Monty Python. I'm talking about Spider 1132 says, thank you so much, Lloyd, for the work you do on becoming Catholic in 2 days. God bless you. Wow, Spider 1132. That's really, really a big step. Not Monty Python on the Holy Grail. We're talking about Indiana Jones, correct. Jesus was not a Jew. Yeah, must have been a Muslim because he submitted to God. Exactly. Okay, so Professor Teabing in the movie and the book, The Da Vinci Code, says that more than 80 Gospels were considered for the New Testament, and yet only a few were chosen for inclusion. Thanks, Sandro. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John among them. These texts, he says, are the earliest Christian records and the unaltered Gospels. So according to Professor Teabing, written, of course, in the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, is stating that these Gnostic Gospels are the earliest Christian records and the unaltered Gospels. Now, this is a bunch of nonsense, and we'll explain why historically. This is fiction. This is genuinely just fiction, and we're going to have to go into detail as to why that is with a number of slides. When the Da Vinci Code came out, every scholar from any theological position, from fundamentalists to the most atheist liberals, said that this book is complete bunk. The claims made about the nature of the Gospels, suggesting that these Gnostic Gospels are the earliest and unaltered, are considered laughable by professionals in the field. Exactly. Nonsense. Complete nonsense, fellows. Good to see you. So these claims are often dismissed as fiction, and most people would have accepted them if it weren't for certain factors. In the Da Vinci Code, the author claimed to have conducted meticulous research that would supposedly revolutionize our understanding. This, coupled with subsequent interviews and statements, angered many, which led to a backlash. Scholars stated that he misconstrued the research and his sources are unreliable. The Nag Hammadi texts are 13 ancient codices, or books, with about 50 Gnostic texts discovered by accident in Upper Egypt in 1945 during excavations. So, Kenoboscion. Right, Kenoboscion, let me just bring that up. So let me bring up this link. So Kenoboscion, Sheneset, right? Kenoboscion means geese pasture in Greek, okay? And then Sheneset means the trees of Seth, the trees of Seth. Seth would be a major figure within Gnosticism as well. So he was the third son of Adam and Eve, so he actually plays a role within Islam as well as in Gnosticism, because they're called Sethian Gnostics. And if you look up the book of Al-Chasai, my talk on Al-Chasai, which I'll do again, that'll become clearer. So Muhammad Ali Saman, similar to the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls, stumbles upon the Nag Hammadi codices searching for fertilizer in the mountains near his village. That's this guy here. Right. Thank you again, Matthew Velasquez. Appreciate that. Thank you again for the support. Much appreciated. So that's really kind of you. Thank you. So give me a sec. So let's see. Let's continue. So this is some of these scrolls, right? So he's here, Muhammad Ali al-Saman at Kenoboscion in front of the monastery. So the books are quickly sold in the black market, but the Egyptian government manages to recover them soon after. The condition of the manuscripts was relatively decent compared to other ancient manuscripts. There's like 1,800 pages of manuscripts that were found. So the codices are taken to the Cairo Museum, where a few years pass before scientists become aware of their significance. In 1966, at a conference in Italy focused on Gnosticism and the new texts, James Robinson gathers editors and translators to publish the Nag Hammadi codices in English. Robinson is chosen to oversee the project, and eventually what they call a facsimile edition of the codices was published. A facsimile edition of the Nag Hammadi codices is a high-quality set of reproductions or photographs of each page of the original manuscripts. So these plates are compiled in book form, allowing readers and scholars to study and examine the texts, even if they don't have direct access to the original codices. It is expensive at $750. Subsequently, an English translation was made available. The introductory material preceding the translation is extracted from Robinson's book, and it states the following. So let's look at the Nag Hammadi library. It includes 12 codices and 8 individual leaves, among other items, as you can see here. All manuscripts are from the 4th century. All the manuscripts are from the 4th century. Now we know the church was founded in the year 33, according to the standard Christian history, right, from the New Testament. So, in other words, these are all late post-Christian. If they're from the 4th century, the 300s, that means they are 300 years after Christianity gets started. Hello from England, Silvana Leveria, welcome from your Uruguayan new subscriber. Thank you very much. Good to have you. Right. Have you noticed that all these odd cults have to deny history? Yes, they all have to deny history. So these manuscripts are written in Coptic. Now, Coptic is a language that emerged by incorporating ancient Egyptian into a Greek framework with several similar letters. Additional letters were introduced into Coptic to represent sounds specific to the Egyptian language, not present in Greek. But certain overlap does exist in these languages, right? So the 1st century spans from the year 0 to 99, while the 2nd century begins with 100 to 199, and so on. Then you have from 200 to 299. That's how centuries work. So specifically, we are discussing manuscripts from the 4th century written during the 300s. So these manuscripts are in Coptic, but scholars widely agree that they are translations of older Greek material. One of the supporting factors is the presence of numerous Greek loanwords in the texts. Silvana says, please ignore the people that say you shouldn't interact with us during a presentation. Well, thank you. Yeah, I try to have a conversation and really interact with people, and many do appreciate that, so thank you. So the Da Vinci Code falsely claims that these texts are the earliest Christian records. They cannot be the earliest Christian records if they are written in a language that comes much later, if they are translations that come from... So anyway, yeah, these are from the 300s. They cannot be the earliest Christian records, and we'll discuss at length why not as we go on. An introductory book on this topic is called Text of the Greek New Testament, Textual Criticism by David Allen Black. This is highly recommended. Then F.F. Bruce writes the Canon of Scripture, right? And Bruce Metzger, the Text of the New Testament. And then, of course, you have Lee M. MacDonald, The Formation of the Christian Biblical Canon. Some books to recommend if you want to have a look at the history of the text of the Greek New Testament, the historical work that shows this. So, this is New Testament Textual Criticism, a concise guide by David Allen Black, and the Nag Hammadi Library by James M. Robinson. Right, let's continue. So, the introductory material prefacing this translation notes the library of the 4th papyrus manuscript consists of 12 codices plus 8 leaves from the 13th and contains 52 separate tractates. Due to duplications, there are 45 separate titles. Because the majority of the library's tractates derive from the Hellenistic sects, now called Gnostic, and survive in Coptic translations, it is characterized as the Coptic Gnostic Library. So that's from this book here, an absolute goldmine of the literature of Gnosticism, the Nag Hammadi Library, the definitive translation of the Gnostic scriptures, complete in 1 volume, James M. Robinson, General Editor. So let's have a look. Jesus is crucified here, 33 AD, and the Christian church is founded. The New Testament, Gospels, Acts, and even the Didache are written here, as early as the year 50, or perhaps even slightly sooner. Now, the presumed Greek original Gnostic Gospels are presumed to be written from about the year 145 onwards. So, in this period. Now, the Coptic Gnostic Gospels of Nag Hammadi are written during this period from roughly 250 to about 375, 380. So the Coptic Gnostic Gospels are written in this period. The New Testament Gospels and the Book of Acts and others are written here. So up to about this point, the Book of John is written, and that's the New Testament done. Do I need to affiliate to any religion to follow this channel? I'm looking to learn. No. I mean, I have Catholics, I have Protestants from all stripes in the channel. So Patrick Island, welcome, thank you. So yeah, I myself, I grew up in the Anglican Church, which is in one sense very similar to the Catholic Church, in others not. But I think it's quite obvious from what I've said in my videos that I lean very much towards the Catholic Church being the original church, the Catholic Church being authentic. Its doctrine has remained consistent for 2,000 years, and you just need to have a little bit of a thick skin, because I let's just say I take a less than heartwarming view of Martin Luther and Luther's connections to Gnostic heresies and the very, very false Protestant history that is out there, because yeah, Protestants have a slightly less than ideal appreciation of history, shall we say. I mean, look, so we're not burning heretics then. Look, I would need to go into, so the Catholic Church, given certain criteria, obviously recognizes Protestants as Christians, right? I'd have to go and look up exactly what those criteria are, what the reasoning is. But that said, there are groups that claim to be quote-unquote Christian that are clearly not Christian, that are heretical. And don't forget, every single Christian sect, and I've covered this in a couple of episodes that I've done, every single Christian sect, if you go to the 16th to 18th centuries, just after the Reformation, just after Martin Luther, did his whole thing, right? In that period, for the next 200 years, every single Protestant sect claimed lineage to the apostles through known heretics, claimed lineage to the apostles through heresy, and clearly Gnostic groups that are absolutely, positively, flamingly not Christian. So they clearly are appealing to a history that is totally unchristian, that is in no way has ever been identified as Christian, and they're claiming that these are the pure original Christians. That is clearly a bunch of nonsense, and if every single Protestant sect did this, then every single Protestant sect is based on a falsehood, is based on a lie, is based on heresy. It's that simple. So, yeah. You aren't afraid to call it catechism either, just to note you're not as... Yeah, well, yeah, I had... The channel took a major hit. It still suffered, actually, because Catholics were very happy to support the channel when I was discussing Protestantism. The moment I pointed out errors in Catholicism, the channel took a serious hit. My monthly subscriber count is down significantly, and I got slandered and smeared by Catholics, which was not fun. So, yeah, for telling the truth about Catholicism, for pointing out what's in the catechism. And Catholics going, no, that's wrong, that's you're lying. It's like, it's in your catechism. Deal with it. Your popes are saying it. Deal with it. So Catholics called me a liar for pointing out exactly what multiple popes, as well as the catechism, the magisterium of the church, says. So, yeah. Okay, moving on. The majority of scholars date the Gospels before the 80s AD, or even earlier. Now, in my discussion on the Didache, that goes back to 47, 48 even, potentially. Only a small number of scholars suggest later dating for any gospel. Even the Didache is now dated to around 50 AD, so the range is 50 to 80 AD. Patrick Island, true Lord, I'm Catholic, they ran. Yeah, many didn't. Well, so many have stayed, and that's how it is. So it's a live lecture, yes, Michael, so it's a conversational style. So they presumed earlier Greek Gnostic originals are 100 years after the New Testament. So you're looking at Greek originals, or at least a century after the New Testament. So these Gnostic Gospels are later than Christianity. And the New Testament texts are much earlier than any Gnostic text. So those are your dates. And the Council of Nicaea falls here. It had to deal with all of this Gnostic nonsense that was going on. It was necessary to convene it because of the threat of Gnosticism. Wait, I thought the majority of scholars dated the Gospels later. No. Those dates are changing. Archaeology is improving. Ask the Gnostics where their fantasies, their myths are substantiated in archaeological evidence and history, where the archaeology substantiates their crazy mythology. Because there is zero evidence for that. So, continue. So the Gospels, so evidence supporting 50 to 80 AD New Testament text. So the Gospels, specifically Matthew, Mark, and Luke, contain prophecies about the destruction of the temple. So these Gospels serve as predictions for future events. That's Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. So Jesus... I wonder if I should bring these up, just in case. Let me bring up the very first example. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So that's the buildings of the temple. right? So Jesus accurately predicted the destruction of the temple, destroyed in 70 AD. None of the Gospels mention the fulfillment of this prophecy about the temple's destruction, so therefore they had to be written prior to the temple being destroyed. So Luke does not mention the deaths of Paul and Peter in his Gospel or the book of Acts. So external sources indicate that Paul died around 66 to 67 AD. Similarly, Peter was martyred during the reign of Nero, so his death must have occurred prior to 68, likely 66 to 67 AD. So if they had known about this, they would have included this. So they must have been written prior to these dates. The temple destruction and the deaths of important figures like Paul and Peter were significant events in Jewish and Christian history. On the 9th of the month of Av, or August 29th, in AD 70, Jerusalem fell. The temple was burned, and the Jewish state collapsed. So the fortress of Masada was not conquered by the Roman general Flavius Silva until April 73. So the book of Acts ends before the death of Paul, and Luke is believed to have been written before the book of Acts. So this timeline raises questions about why the deaths of important figures like Paul and Peter are not included in the gospel accounts. So by not including them, the Gospels were written before these events took place. Now, manuscript evidence, the Rylands Papyrus. Ancient writers state that Peter was crucified about 34 years after his encounter with Jesus. This time frame aligns with the death of Peter. So that's the Rylands Papyrus. I believe the 1st century text 1 Clement and the writings of later Christians like Origen and Tertullian and John Chrysostom indicate that Paul's death was associated with martyrdom. Although the New Testament does not give specifics about Paul's death, records show he was imprisoned in Rome and wrote several of his epistles during captivity. Did I just miss? I made a wrong mistake here. So let me fix this slide. Apologies, I just need to go back and fix that slide because clearly I've made an error. So let me go and fix that. Good grief. Okay, let me just take this out of the way. That's the right. Okay, this. Let me bring this aside to the side here. So, manuscript evidence, the Rylands Papyrus, is the oldest manuscript fragment of the New Testament. It is dated to the 130s to the 140s AD, when Jesus appeared before Pilate. Okay, so it's the oldest manuscript fragment. It is a fragment of. Hold on, let me just get that. You know, sometimes I make typos, as you know. Let me go back and fix that. Okay, so it is dated to the 130s to 140s AD. It is a fragment of John 18, 31 to 33, where Jesus appeared before Pilate. Let's have a look. Then Pilate said unto them, oops, let's go back here, get it again. Then said Pilate unto them, take ye him, and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said, it is not lawful for us to put any man to death, because the Jews were under the Roman law, and they could not do capital punishment. That the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said unto him, art thou the king of the Jews? Sorry, some small time. So yeah, anyway. So the papyrus dates to this date, and it's a fragment of this. It contains the interaction between Pilate and the Jews, with Pilate telling them to take Jesus and judge him according to your law. The Jews replied they were not authorized to put anyone to death, which is fascinating that everyone says, oh, the Jews killed Jesus. Well, they weren't given permission under Roman law to kill anybody. They couldn't put anyone to death. So this had to come from Pilate. They said that in order that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, the Jews mentioned that the word of Jesus needed to be fulfilled regarding the type of death he would die. Jesus had to die. So those Christians claiming, well, the Jews killed him, and if he hadn't been killed, he would have lived. Well, then, unfortunately, he wouldn't have conquered death. There would be no resurrection. There would be no salvation, because then those Christians are bad Christians, because they're saying that, well, Jesus was wrong to die, and that would destroy the basis of Christianity. So I've got to question your history and your theology. Now, the red letters in the papyrus indicate this specific text. That these are the red letters here. So the papyrologists and the New Testament paleographical experts analyze and study these ancient manuscripts, and computers, of course, make it much easier. So Dunn Brown in his academic sources failed to address these facts due to ignorance or deceit. Let's continue. All right. So the age of the Nag Hammadi, Gospels or Scrolls versus Gospels in the New Testament. So is there hard evidence that the New Testament Gospels are older than the oldest Nag Hammadi material? Yes. What about the entire New Testament? Is it older than the oldest Nag Hammadi material? The answer is yes. We've already discussed that, right? That's our documents here. Now, the Epistle of Pseudo-Barnabas, 70 to 79 AD, quotes Matthew and Mark. So that falls within this period, 50 to 80. The Didache quotes Matthew extensively. So then, of course, the Didache dates from roughly 48 to the year 50, according to lots of new research. So then that means Matthew must date from even sooner than the year 50. Luke and John are quoted in the Muratorian fragment from 170 to 180 AD. Polycarp, who lived from 69 to 155, right, and the Shepherd of Hermas date from 100 to 160. Both of these reference the New Testament, and that is before the Greek original Gnostic Gospels. So early church fathers and writers frequently quote the New Testament in their sermons, their commentaries, and their theological writings. Roman records help establish the dates of these figures and when they lived, providing a chronological framework. So when early church figures quote passages from the New Testament, this fixes a date for the existence of these passages before the quotation. So the Didache and the Muratorian fragment, etc. So the Didache extensively quotes from the Gospel of Matthew and is commonly dated between 70 and 130 AD. Newer research tells us this is dated 48 to 50 AD. Right? So the Muratorian fragment mentions quotes from the Gospel of Luke and John and is dated to be around 170 to 180 AD. The Muratorian fragment, also known as the Muratorian canon, is a copy of the oldest known list of most of the books of the New Testament. External methods of dating, analyzing historical records and other ancient texts also help establish the timing and the authenticity of these quotations and texts. So I made another mistake here. Paleographical analysis, carbon-14 dating, and other methods can be used to determine the age and authenticity of ancient texts, including the writings of ancient church fathers. Polycarp lived from 69 to 155, a convert of the Apostle John, and he quotes from the New Testament books, including Acts. The Shepherd of Hermas also quotes from Acts. The epistles of Paul, particularly Romans, are cited by early church fathers like Clement of Rome, Polycarp, and the Didache. These citations provide further evidence for the existence and use of these texts in the early church. So if the Didache dates to the year 50, that means that there were epistles written by Paul prior to that. Right, so hopefully this provides lots of evidence that discusses that the Gnostic Gospels come much later than the New Testament. So a pattern is forming. So 1 Corinthians is cited in the Didache and the Shepherd of Hermas, as well as 2 Corinthians is cited by Polycarp. Galatians is cited by Polycarp and Ignatius. So let's have a look. Ephesians and Colossians are cited by Polycarp, Clement, and Ignatius. Philippians is cited by Polycarp, showing a pattern of early references to the New Testament. So every book of the New Testament is quoted in a source earlier than the oldest Gnostic material. Every book of the New Testament is quoted in a source earlier than the oldest known Gnostic material. Other epistles of Paul, like 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and the 1st Timothy and Titus, are cited by Clement and by the Didache. So Romans is cited by Clement of Rome, 95 to 97, right? Polycarp, who lived from 69 to 155, and by the Didache, which dates from 50 to 70. 1 Corinthians is cited in the Didache and the Shepherd of Hermas. 2 Corinthians is cited in Polycarp and the Shepherd of Hermas, and the Epistle of Diognetus in 150. Right, Galatians is cited by Polycarp and Diognetus. Ephesians and Colossians are cited by Polycarp, the Shepherd of Hermas, and Ignatius from 50 to 117. And Philippians is cited by Polycarp, Shepherd of Hermas, and Ignatius. So you're looking at 117 as the latest date. Right, let's continue. So Ignatius makes allusions to the personal letters of Philemon, with some debate over whether it's an actual quotation or an allusion, but it serves the analysis. So the book of Hebrews is often cited by Clement, showing early usage. Other New Testament books like James, 1st and 2nd Peter are cited by Clement. 1st John and the Shepherd of Hermas and the 2nd John are cited by Polycarp and other sources, and also referenced by other early church figures. The book of Revelation is cited by the Shepherd of Hermas and Justin Martyr, dated to 160 AD, again demonstrating early acknowledgement and use of the text. So 1 Timothy and Titus are cited repeatedly by Clement, also cited in the Didache 1 Timothy, and the Shepherd of Hermas. That's around the year 100, right? 1 Timothy and Titus. Ignatius makes allusions to the personal letter to Philemon, so he's discussing that right after the year 100. 1 and 2 Thessalonians are cited in the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, Polycarp, and Ignatius around the same time. So the Shepherd of Hermas is a 2nd century Christian writing, part of the works representing the Apostolic Fathers. It's attributed to Hermas, an enslaved Christian that was given his freedom and became a wealthy merchant. It has 5 visions, right, experienced by Hermas, along with 12 mandates called moral commandments and 10 parables. The basic theme of the Shepherd of Hermas is that post-baptismal sin can be forgiven at least once. It is considered a valuable indication of a type of Jewish Christianity and regarded as scripture by some early church fathers such as Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Tertullian. Of course, it did not make its way into the final canon. So the book of Hebrews is cited around this year 100 by Clement, and it's in the Didache, which dates from here. James is cited by Clement and by Ignatius. Let's continue. 1 and 2 Peter are cited by Clement. That's around the year 100. 1 John is cited in the Shepherd of Hermas. That's around the year 110. 2 John is cited by Polycarp and in the Muratorian fragment, which dates from 170 to 180, as well as Polycarp around this date, 120. So 3 John and Jude are also cited by the Muratorian fragment. Revelation is cited in the Didache, the Shepherd of Hermas, and by Justin Martyr as late as 160, but of course as early as the year 50. Right? So understand, so hopefully based on what you've seen here, this timeline, breaking down the timeline and this, right? So the links are all available. So, okay. Yeah. So basically, hopefully you see here that the New Testament is cited within Christian documents long before the Gnostic Gospels are written, because they clearly are based upon and follow upon the Christian documents. Hermas. This way it sounds like Hamas. So I've been saying Hermas, haven't I? DMAC, welcome. So let me see if I've missed anything. Yeah. Kutam gave himself name Muhammad, the praised one, Allah is the praised one, so he's Allah. Yeah, well, exactly. Jesus is also the praised one. Okay, so yeah. So guys, hopefully this gives you some idea that we can rely upon the Christian record and that the Gnostic record is just not, it cannot be the earliest. Dan Brown is wrong. Dan Brown is providing false information. Yeah, so historians say that the Shepherd of Hermas was read in some churches, which helps destroy sola scriptura and the final authority used in the early apostolic church. Yeah, the early Christian fathers did not believe that the Bible was the sole, rule of faith, because how do you translate it? How do you interpret it? Right? But we'll discuss that when I get into Martin Luther. I have no idea, because that's not something I'm knowledgeable of. Okay, so also halahal means poison in Sanskrit. Searching for halahala in Google, it's pronounced like halal. You can't tell the difference. Interesting, Terry. That's very interesting. I'll bring that up again here. This very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. The Sanskrit. Yeah, which also tells us there's an Indian connection to Islam. I know that. I have seen it myself, but I haven't spoken about it or done any work on it. So let's have a look at the early church fathers. How long have we been going? So, okay. All right, so Clement of Rome was an early Christian leader and the 4th Bishop of Rome, known for his epistle to the Corinthians and his emphasis on church unity. Clement of Rome is born around 35 AD, grows up as the early Christian church is spreading throughout the Roman Empire. Early Christian writers suggest that he knew some of the apostles personally, and he was directly influenced by their teaching. Polycarp, 2nd century Christian bishop and martyr, a disciple of the apostle John, a significant figure in early Christianity in Asia Minor, where all the Gnostics went. Origen was an influential Christian theologian and biblical scholar of the 3rd century, known for his teachings on theology, textual criticism, and the allegorical interpretation of Scripture. Tertullian, a prominent early Christian writer and apologist, known for his defense of the faith against heresies and his development of Latin Christian vocabulary. Clement of Alexandria, early Christian theologian from the late 2nd to early 3rd century, known for his blend of Christian philosophy and Greek philosophical ideas and his emphasis on harmony between faith and reason in Christianity, something that Martin Luther heavily opposed. Let's do a map of Asia Minor. I'll do like another 4 slides, then I'll call it a day probably. So, map of Asia Minor, right? So, This is the traditional region of Anatolia, and then the letters in italics are the regions of Greek settlement. So anything in italics here is Greek settlement. So we're looking at this region of the world here. So the entire New Testament is quoted before the writing of any Gnostic gospel. I actually bought this book, Fabricating Jesus, How Modern Scholars Distort the Gospel. Oh, no, I bought Jesus Under Fire. Sorry, Craig A. Evans. By the way, Craig A. Evans, I would strongly recommend you watch his talks on YouTube. The guy's brilliant. Man, he takes no prisoners, he pulls no punches. Right, Craig A. Evans. Look up his talks on YouTube. They're fantastic. So, Fabricating Jesus, How Modern Scholars Distort the Gospel. Really, really worth talking about, worth watching. So the entire New Testament is quoted before the writing of any Gnostic Gospels. So let's see. The only possible exception among Gnostic material is the Gospel of Thomas, which may be roughly contemporary with some of the later Gospels, but there is debate. It's just your boy Jay says, interesting. Doesn't also Islam claim at least the elites of Freemason Muslims, etc., that they have true Gnostic religion? Also mixed with some of the Egyptian gods? Yes, they do exactly that. So, yes, the Muslims claim to have founded Freemasonry. They are the original Freemasons, and that they also inherited the Sufis, that they inherited the original Egyptian mystery religion. Which, yeah. So, Lloyd, you bring so much evidence for early Christianity. I've read the Bible so many times I failed to see sola fide and sola scriptura. Yes, it's crazy to see how these Protestants are deceived into believing that. Wait till I talk more about Martin Luther. It's nuts. Okay, let's continue. All right. So according to Dr. Michael Heiser, the Gospel of Thomas is a topic of debate, still with scholars. And obtaining scholarly material related to it can be expensive and may require access to a library, although you can find things online. So scholars like Craig Evans created a harmony of the Gospels, which combines the narratives of the four Gospels, or the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, into a cohesive storyline. Craig Evans' harmony highlights the connections between the Gospel of Thomas and the canonical Gospels by indicating where Thomas quotes from the Gospels. So the Gospel of Thomas takes from the earlier Gospels and then repurposes them for its own use. So clearly it is later than the original Gospels. So let's have a look at the message in the Da Vinci Clown. More than 80 Gospels were considered for the New Testament, yet only a relative few were chosen for inclusion. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John among them. So, said Lee Teabing in the Da Vinci Clown, so this falsely implies that all Gospels written in the ancient world were being considered at relatively the same time. That's false, because the Gnostic Gospels are clearly written much later, at least 100 years later than the Gospels. So, there's no way they could have been included for selection, right? Dumb Brown's academic characters contend that the decision over which books to include in the New Testament was made at Nicaea in 325 AD. That again is false. Okay, Nicaea was a discussion. While it did reaffirm the Bible, that was a minor aspect of it. It was really a discussion about the Arian controversy. That there existed no early consensus in the decades that followed the writing of the New Testament Gospels, for which Gospels told the true story of Jesus. So he's saying that there was no consensus over which Gospels told the true story of Jesus. However, the early church had an early consensus on the four Gospels. It implies a conspiracy involving picking and choosing from 80 books and rejecting truth and secrets in the others for potentially nefarious and conspiratorial reasons. It's crazy how they weren't selecting books that were not yet written. It's insane that the early church fathers didn't choose books that weren't written yet. Dumb Brown creates the impression that all the Gospels were worthy of equal weight or consideration. We'll look at some of the contents of some of those, and you'll see why they could never be included anyway. With 80 books, how could anyone know what was true? Yes, Dr. Obvious, secrets. There were secrets. So according to Indians, the Aryans were considered to be noble and smart and enlightened, but yeah, so it's according to the Nazis as well, right? Right. So yet no Christian in the ancient world believed any of that. There is no evidence amongst the early Christians that they believed a word of what Dan Brown or Dumb Brown in the Da Vinci Clown was claiming. So the four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were widely accepted and recognized as authoritative accounts of the life and teaching of Jesus Christ from an early period in Christian history. The process of formally establishing the New Testament canon took several centuries, was not finalized until the Councils of Hippo and Carthage, 393 and 397. Now, I've got other videos on the channel discussing this. I'm not going to go into that now. I've got other videos discussing in detail these were already established within the first century, but there were issues, there were heresies, there were other problems, and therefore these councils had to finally and fully establish and affirm this so that there was no question. But these were responses to heresies, these were responses to controversies within the church. So they had to finally say, look guys, can we just stop arguing about this? This is already settled. I will be talking about Simon Magus. That's coming up much later in the discussion. So the Diatessaron and the first Bible canon. So the Gospels are written 50 to 80 AD. John dies around 100, maybe 96 AD, roughly 50 years later. The heretic Marcion or Marcion came after John. He categorizing inspired writings into gospel and apostle groups. So Marcion makes the first Bible canon. The reason we actually have the canon, the reason the canon had to be formed was because Marcion created the first Bible canon of 11 books, throwing out most of the Bible. Right? But he selected only 11 books with edits for his own personal new biblical canon. So Marcion did not include the Gospel of Thomas or the Nag Hammadi Gospels. Fascinating. Maybe they weren't around at the time. Marcion, 2nd AD, right, born in Sinope, Asia Minor, now Turkey, becomes a prominent figure in early Christianity in Rome. So he's known for his controversial teachings. He founded the Marcionite movement, which was considered heretical by the Christian church. I say hello, Luther, because I've discussed Lutheran theologians discussing how Marcion and Luther was so similar, and Luther was continuing the Marcion tradition. Justin Martyr in 160 produced a list of the memoirs of the apostles. In 170 AD, Tatian creates the Diatessaron, a harmony of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is still available in fragmentary form, mostly in Syriac. The Muratorian fragment listed various books as canonical, including the Gospels. That's around 160 as well, right? The Diatessaron is a harmonized gospel text that combines the canonical Gospels into a single narrative. Created by Tatian, a 2nd century Christian writer and theologian, it presents a unified and synthesized account of Jesus' life and teachings. It is widely used, and it is influential in some Christian communities. It fell out of favor and was superseded by individual gospel manuscripts. Remember, at the time, you couldn't just photocopy or use your laser printer to make copies of books. They had to be painstakingly and very expensively written by hand. And distribution, there was no FedEx at the time. DHL wasn't around either. So let's look at Tatian and the Diatessaron. Typo, Tatian. In 170 AD, the Muratorian fragment describes the four Gospels, 13 epistles of Paul, Jude, and 2 epistles of John as canonical. The Diatessaron, created by Tatian, included the harmony of the four Gospels. The Diatessaron was popular in Assyria among the Syriac-speaking church, lasting until the early 5th century before being replaced by the four Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, also known as the Gospel of Thomas to Didymus Judas Thomas, is believed to have originated from the Syriac-speaking church in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So notice the parallel here. The fact that this designation is unique to the Syriac church suggests that the Gospel of Thomas was present in that region during its early circulation. So the Gospel of Thomas is commonly known as the Gospel of Thomas, but it is also known as the Gospel of Thomas to Didymus Judas Thomas in the Syriac region, right? So therefore we have a location for the origin of the Gospel of Thomas. So Tatian, the creator of the Diatessaron, did not include the Gospel of Thomas in his harmony of the four Gospels, indicating Tatian did not consider the Gospel of Thomas to be canonical. So we know it was around in that part of the world, but yes, he did not consider it canonical. This exclusion demonstrates that Tatian did not view the Gospel of Thomas on the same level as the four canonical Gospels. So let's do a last couple of slides. Hopefully this is interesting and not dull. I know it's very academic what I'm doing here, but hopefully I'm laying evidence, presenting what is good evidence based on Dr. Michael Heiser's talk, and hopefully displaying it graphically so you can understand how these Gnostic Gospels are very late parodies of the original Gospels. So Justin Martyr, early Christian apologist and theologian from 2nd century, roughly 100 to 165 AD. Particularly in his first apology, he calls the Gospels the memoirs of the apostles. So he calls the Gospels the memoirs of the apostles. He then goes on and he says, so it describes the written accounts of the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that was circulating among early Christian communities. It emphasizes the eyewitness nature of the gospel accounts and connection to apostolic tradition. I need to stop here and, of course, do this whole YouTube thing where I've got to say things like, please like, share, subscribe, smash that, make jihad on the like button. remember to brush your teeth at least twice a day, and change your toothbrush every 3 months. Make sure that you change your oil, that you check your tire pressure, and anything else that's important for people on YouTube to say. But so yeah, okay. So he emphasizes the eyewitness nature of the gospel accounts and the connection to apostolic tradition. Interesting. So you've got history for that. All right. Now, so he highlights that the gospels are written by the apostles or based on their teachings and experiences. So he's giving us corroborative proof of the origin of the gospels. Lloyd needs dental sponsorship. Love me. Yeah, maybe I do. So he believed that the gospels were reliable accounts of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, which he used to defend and explain Christian beliefs to non-believers and critics. This underscores their importance as authoritative sources of Christian doctrine and history. So Marcion comes 144 AD, just before this whole Gnostic explosion, right? So he writes a thing called the Gospel and the Apostle, right? That's his division of the Bible into these books, right? So Justin Martyr writes in 160 AD the Memoirs of the Apostles. That's what he calls the Gospels. And Tatian and the Diatessaron, the Harmony of Four, that comes here, right? Then you have the Muratorian fragment, describes 4 Gospels, 13 epistles of Paul, Jude, and 2 epistles of John. We've already had evidence from much earlier than that. Patrick Island says, Catholics haven't dumped you yet, bro. Thank you very much. So, let me see. Did I miss anything? Someone mentioned anything? Bava Paints Phil says, the most bizarre thing is how come this historical evidence escapes every school curriculum, simply showing the war against Christ is in every work of life. Yes, that is very true. Definitely will need to rewatch this a few times. Thank you. Yes, Lolo Main, you're very welcome. Thank you. Why were the Catholics up in arms anyway? What did you say? You can't come to Lloyd's channel and not expect your previous beliefs to be upended. Yeah, I know. So basically, I showed like 4 popes, including Pius X, and even the Catholic Catechism clearly stating that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, right? That Allah of Islam and Yahweh of the Bible are the same God. Although the Catholic Catechism does state, the Catholic Church does teach that the Muslims have effectively butchered or corrupted the idea of God. They've got the wrong view of God. So they have the same God, but they have taken an incorrect view of him. They've twisted, they've misinterpreted, they've applied poor theology to the concept of God. So they say that this is the same God. Although I think given modern knowledge, given a modern understanding of Islam, this cannot be the same God. I mean, this would be my view. I think so. The Catholic Church, I think, might need to want to take a new view of this, a new look at this. But this upset people who said, no, the Catholic Church does not teach that. The Catholic Church explicitly does teach that. But they told me that this does not, Catholic Church does not teach it. I then mentioned the sources, and I actually had one Catholic tell me, oh, so these are your Catholic sources. I'm like, I wasn't aware that the Catechism belongs to me. I thought it's part of the magisterium of the Catholic Church, but okay, fine, whatever. So yeah, so one Catholic actually put out a video smearing me, calling me a liar, and yeah, that was all fun and games. So I've still got screenshots of all of it. So yeah, but yeah, so yeah, I mean, it leads to questions. I mean, that I would think is something that needs to be re-looked at. Okay, so yeah, but that's something that the Catholic Church does teach. Now we can disagree with it, but we must also understand, to be fair, I also did state that we need to understand why the Catholic Church made that decision. We need to understand what their rationale is. We can't simply just criticize it without understanding what it is, what the intention is, or what the rationale is, because we don't have all the information as to the rationale. We need that information. So I did say we need to discuss that in more depth. But people were up in arms. It caused a huge stink. Let's put it that way. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so let's continue. So here you've got Justin Martyr, you've got all these. Okay, let's move on. Let's do another slide or so. Okay, so the Gospel of Thomas is not canon, right? That's the Gospel of Thomas. And I will go into much depth. This is 200 slides I've got. This is going to be like 300 slides at the end of the day. This is going to be long, 250 slides. This is going to be a lengthy talk, but I need to lay out all of this history, go through all of this history and show how the history of the Christian canon has been misrepresented, early Christianity has been misrepresented, and the common modern view of Gnosticism is just false. All right, so Justin's disciple Tatian produced a new edition of the Fourfold Gospel by unstitching the sections of its 4 component parts, then rearranging them so as to form one continuous narrative. This edition, the Diatessaron, or the harmony of four proved very popular, especially in Assyria, where the Syriac-speaking church was most unwilling to abandon it at the beginning of the 5th century in favor of a new Syriac version of the 4 separate Gospels. So understand there were arguments. So yeah, old habits died hard. So the Gospel of Thomas has been dated as early as AD 50 to 70 and as late as the end of the 2nd century. Note the wide divergence of dating opinion. But since parallels to its more explicitly Gnostic concepts and terminology date from the 2nd century, it is probably no older than the end of the 1st century. Because the Gospel of Thomas partakes of Gnostic ideas, it must come from not earlier than the end of the 1st century. Right? It is probably no older than the end of the 1st century. This attribution of the Gospel to Didymus Judas Thomas shows that it derives from the East Syrian Christian tradition centered on Edessa. The New Testament canon, the Gospel of Thomas, Dictionary of Jesus, and the Gospels. So Didymus means twin, right? So we need the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. So sorry, this is a chapter called New Testament canon, Gospel of Thomas, in a book called the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospel from InterVarsity Press, by the way. So Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. So yeah. Didymus means twin. It comes from the eastern part of the Roman Empire, the Syriac-speaking church, the only place that designation is found. So now we know where the Gospel of Thomas hails from, right? The Gospel of Thomas was around in the Syriac church, but was not in the Diatessaron. Tatian did not accept it. And Tatian is not from the evil western part of the empire, the Catholic part, with the evil Catholic bishops. He's from the east. So in other words, he's not rejecting it because he's an evil Catholic. He's rejecting it because the Gospel of Thomas is not canon. It is Gnostic. It is not a valid Christian book. So the Gospel canon was known 150 years before Nicaea. So understand also, Nicaea did not establish the New Testament canon. The Gospel canon was known and established 150 years before Nicaea even happened. So, okay, so I'll finish off on this slide. How about I just finish on slide 53? The Message and the Da Vinci Clown. These Gnostic texts are the unaltered Gospels. Dan Brown says on page 248. The statement assumes that the Gnostic Gospels all agree on the details of Jesus' life and teachings, which is completely false. The Gnostic Gospels do not agree on the life and teachings of Jesus. Remember, these are 45 different narratives, each with their own particular take on Christianity, Gnostic Christianity. These are 45 contradictory, incompatible ideas that they share certain heretical concepts. They share certain common concepts, but none of them tell the same story. So which one do you choose? Some of the stories are the same story told by 3 different groups in 3 different ways. Which one is correct? They are all over the place. The Gospel tell one story of the resurrection. The Gospels tell one story of the crucifixion, right? Whereas these Gnostic Gospels are just myth. They make things up. They're all over the place. So, right? So the statement assumes that the Gnostic Gospels all agree on the details of Jesus' life and teachings. In reality, the Gnostic Gospels do not all agree on who Jesus was, on what Jesus said, where Jesus went, and what Jesus did. There are disagreements among the Gnostic Gospels, indicating changes and alterations. The Gnostic Gospels are not a unified monolithic source, so they cannot be. They're just, unfortunately, like Protestantism, they are just theologies that are just all over the place, completely nuts. I mean, I've gone into some of the stuff of Mani. I'll do that again. I'll discuss what Mani believes. You read it and you're like, this is fantasy. This is like fantasy while someone's tripping on drugs. Right? The Gnostic Gospels are not unified. They're not monolithic, and they do not have perfect agreement. They frequently disagree. It implies that the disagreements between the canonical Gospels invalidate them as accurate sources for the life and teachings of Jesus. Well, so if you say that the canonical Gospels disagree slightly, therefore they are not valid, the Gnostic Gospels, they're just wild disagreement, which means they are absolutely, totally disqualified from having any kind of validity whatsoever. So, yeah, let me finish here. Page 54, what the heck? Let me go on. Okay, the Gospel of Thomas, the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels, that's the book here, the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels, InterVarsity Press. The Coptic version of the Gospel of Thomas was discovered in 1945 among the Nag Hammadi codices. Since then, it has received more scholarly attention than any other extra-canonical Gospel. It is more important for the study of Jesus and the canonical Gospels than any other extra-canonical Gospel of which we have a complete text. As well as the Coptic version of the whole Gospel of Thomas, there are 3 fragments in Greek, which would be earlier. which were discovered among the Oxyrhynchus papyri and published in 1897 and 1904, but not recognized as fragments of the Gospel of Thomas until the Coptic version became known. And it states here, though there are significant differences between the Greek fragments, which are from 3 distinct copies of the work, and the Coptic text that are recognizably from the same work, must therefore have existed in at least 2 redactions. So there were multiple competing versions of the Gospel of Thomas alone, and now you've got 3 different versions. So you've got 2 different versions, which became 3 different versions, which we now have this one version that in the Coptic. And that's the Gospel of Thomas, Dictionary of Jesus, and the Gospels. So even these, so how Dan Brown can claim that these are the unaltered Gospels, there is no truth to that. It cannot be true. He's simply, that is fiction. The man is writing fiction. Understand that the Da Vinci Clown is a book of fiction. So guys, I'll stop here. I think this is good. We've gone long enough. I think it's roughly an hour and a half or so. So guys, we'll call it that. Hopefully this has been interesting as a historical discussion. Hopefully you've learned a great deal. And especially in terms of the historical. Christianity is a historical religion, right? It is based on history. It is based on truth. So, of course, if the story is true, then God exists. Then Jesus came down to earth. God came to earth. He died. He was resurrected. If this history is true, then of course every other story that tries to destroy it is an enemy of the truth, right? So understand that the definition of truth for us would be that Christ came down to earth, died, was resurrected. So that is truth. Everything else is an attempt to destroy that truth. It is an attempt to destroy this historical truth, and also, therefore, it must, according to what I'm stating here, it must then try to conceal or confuse the truth. Also, it must try to conceal and confuse and destroy the method we use to determine what truth is. So hopefully this has been useful to understand the place in history of the Gnostic Gospels versus the canonical Gospels. So thank you all very much. So yes, that's also true. The Catholic Church does not have... No, the Catholic Church doctrine is very much consistent across the last 2,000 years as I've seen, as I've looked at it. And these are all churches in communion with Rome. That's the 23 different rites. It's not 23 different sects like the Protestants who are completely in disagreement with each other, who have incompatible, contradictory doctrines. That is, which one of those is correct if they all cannot even agree? So, yeah. So guys, thank you very much. I hope it's been great, and have a wonderful Sunday. I will see you guys tomorrow evening. I will be talking about, let me bring that up quickly. Let me bring up, I'll be discussing this guy tomorrow, Lucifer, the first Protestant. Let me go through where I am. By the way, I've made this available, as I mentioned, for those who are, there's a free version, 15, I've linked it. 15, the first 15 slides is available for free to those who just want it and want to download and have a look. And then for subscribers to the channel, I have made the first 30 slides available. So we will be starting here tomorrow about Martin Luther, how Martin Luther founded the Protestant religion of peace. So yeah, let's see. I finished up kind of here yesterday, last week, 2 weeks ago, or a week ago. Martin Luther was, Muhammad used to have seizures. Muhammad was very sick. Then you'd find out that Darwin was, for instance, a very sick man. Well, so was Martin Luther. He was really sick. And of course, propaganda had to be put out to make him seem really, really healthy and strong and virile and a strong man. And of course, we've discussed this, so I can discuss that. We'll do a lot of this, but Martin Luther was a very sick man. And there is evidence, at least as discussed by doctors who've gone over his history, that think that he was a little not so good. But for instance, Luther is the monster of Table Talk number 5207, whose suggestion to suffocate a 12-year-old boy, presumably suffering from Prader-Willi syndrome, right? So Martin Luther does write. This book is called Disability in the Christian Tradition, and Martin Luther stated, oh, this kid is disabled. He has no soul. He was created by the devil or infested by the devil. You should kill him. Either take him to the river and drown him or put a pillow over his mouth and suffocate him to death, because that's how Martin Luther felt we should deal with disabled people. Now, of course, the Nazis who utilized his notes, and because Martin Luther wrote some really fascinating things that perfectly suited the Nazi purposes, because Martin Luther and the Nazis were on the same page on a lot of issues, which means that the Nazis were either Christians or Martin Luther was crazy. Pick one. So as I said, either the Nazis were good Christians because Martin Luther's theology and Martin Luther's writings and the Nazis, they were like this. So either the Nazis are really good Christians, or Martin Luther was a bit of a Nazi himself. Take your pick, which way you want to go with this. Because the Nazis were able to vindicate the legalization of the killing of disabled people using Martin Luther's own words. Yeah, and own writing. So that's good old Martin. Thanks. And then, of course, Martin Luther says, the temporal sword and temporal government have never been so clearly described or so highly praised as by me. Martin Luther was saying that, you know, the use of the sword by the government and the praise of government, my support of government, you know, we're talking tyrannical government by the princes and the use of the government sword. I have praised this more than anybody because I am just... And he says, and he writes it, what else is war than the punishment of wrong and evil? And Martin Luther goes on, we've discussed already, Martin Luther's praise for the government killing people, you know, and remember, he says, the hand that wages such a sword and kills is not a human hand, but it's God's hand. So if you kill, remember those peasants, the 100,000 peasants that got killed? Martin Luther sided with the princes against the oppression that they were imposing on the peasants. And he says, but it's God's hand that's killing them, not a man, and God hangs them. God breaks them on the wheel. God tortures them. It's not you torturing the peasants. It's God who's torturing them. God decapitates. God strangles and fights. These are all God's works and God's judgments. War is God's work in progress. Thanks, Martin. That's Martin Luther, clearly the religion of peace right there. We'll be talking more about that. I'll be talking about, Luther's preference for bigamy. Luther insisted that whatever was not specifically forbidden by Scripture was an option for the Christian, and there is no biblical ban on polygamy. So Luther said, I cannot object if a man wants to take several wives, since Allah does not forbid it. Since Holy Scripture does not forbid it, so therefore Allah allows you to take multiple wives. That's Martin Luther for you, which is very Christian, right? So either am I taking drugs? Because I personally, I'm of the obviously incorrect view that Christians don't take multiple wives. That's for Muslims and pagans. But Martin Luther says, hey, it's all good. How many wives do you want? 3, 4? Knock yourself out. There's no biblical ban on cocaine. Yes, Dennis, there is no biblical ban on cocaine. So cocaine, we cannot object to that because there is no biblical ban on cocaine. Yes. There you go. That's Martin Luther. You are as wise as Martin Luther. Pat yourself on the back, Dennis. So, yeah, guys. Martin Luther, we're going to be discussing this utter and total freak. As I said, Martin Luther, at best, was an asshole. And I say that seriously because I could say a lot worse things than this man. I'm trying to be polite here. I am trying to be polite by calling this man a complete and utter asshole at best. That's the nicest thing I can say about him. Yeah. So let's see. So guys, so let's call it a night. Thank you very much. And we're going to be talking about this tomorrow. And so that's Martin Luther, and we're going to be taking this man apart because this is an absolutely disgusting, filthy, reprehensible, heretical, blasphemous, just pig of a man. That's Martin Luther. So guys, I will see you tomorrow evening. Have a wonderful night, and till next time. Thanks.